Hello and welcome back guys. Today we are starting a new story titled, UA Zombies, written by Death12976. Please check the link in the description, and let's start. Part 1. The whispers of the rotting world. The muted blue glow of the television screen painted the familiar, cluttered walls of Izuku's dorm room. Empty instant ramen containers and scattered hero analysis notebooks formed their usual chaotic landscape. On the screen, a news anchor with a strained smile was reporting on a series of unusual flu-like outbreaks in a distant prefecture. Authorities are urging citizens to remain calm, she said, her voice a little too high-pitched, and to practice good hygiene. Symptoms include fever, coughing, and in some isolated cases, unusual aggression. Izuku, perched on the edge of his bed, chewed thoughtfully on the end of his pen. Unusual aggression. That sounded concerning. He'd seen enough villainous quirks to know that seemingly minor anomalies could escalate quickly. Still, it was probably nothing. Just a bad strain of the flu. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a group chat with the rest of Class 1A. Katsuki, King Explosion Murder Oi Deku. You muttering about some bug on the news again. Stop being such a DMN worrywart. Ajiro, rock solid. Yeah man. It's probably just a cold going around. Don't get your hero pants in a twist. Mina, Pinky, maybe it's a zombie quirk gone wild. Imagine. Woman zombie Denki, charge bolt. Don't even joke about that, Mina. That's seriously creepy. Kyoka, earphone jack. Honestly, it just sounds like bad journalism trying to get views. Izuku sighed, a familiar wave of exasperation washing over him. They meant well, but sometimes their nonchalance was baffling. He typed back a hesitant message. Izuku, Deku, I know it's probably nothing. But that unusual aggression part, it just feels a little off. Achiko, Uravity, you always look into things deeply, Deku-kun. It's one of your strengths. But try not to worry too much, okay? A small smile touched Izuku's lips. Achiko always knew how to make him feel a little better. He put his phone down, but his gaze kept drifting back to the television. The news segment had moved on to local traffic, but the anchor's earlier words echoed in his mind. The next day at UA felt strangely normal. Sunlight streamed through the classroom windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Aizawa-sensei droned on about hero ethics, his usual tired demeanor unchanged. But during lunch, the hushed conversations were all about the news. Reports were filtering in of more incidents, not just in that initial prefecture but spreading to neighboring areas. The flu was causing violent outbursts, and the infected seemed to be biting people. See Deku. I told you it was just a bug. Katsuki scoffed, grabbing a handful of spicy curry. But Kaken, Izuku began, fidgeting with his chopsticks. They're saying the people who are bitten are getting sick too and acting the same way. So what? Some kinda contagious rage quirk went viral. Heroes'll handle it. Katsuki's dismissive tone didn't quite mask the flicker of something unreadable in his crimson eyes. It's still worrying, Tenya Ida chopped the air with his hand, his movements more frantic than usual. We must remain vigilant and follow any instructions given by the authorities. Yeah, but what can we do? Ajiro asked, his brow furrowed. It's not like we can just punch a virus. The wild pussycats were visiting UA for a joint training exercise with Class 1B. Mandalay, Pixie Bob, Ragdoll, and Tiger were their usual boisterous selves, their energy infectious even amidst the unsettling news. Koda, however, was quieter than usual, sticking close to Mandalay. He'd been spending more time around Izuku lately, often watching him train with a mixture of admiration and something else Izuku couldn't quite place. Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The news became a constant stream of terrifying updates. The flu was officially being referred to as a pandemic. Cities were going into lockdown. The unusual aggression was revealed to be something far more sinister. The infected were no longer just aggressive. They were ravenous, their eyes glazed over, their movements jerky and unnatural. They craved flesh. Panic began to ripple through UA. Aizawa-sensei, his usual weariness replaced by a grim determination, gathered the students. Listen carefully, he said, his voice low and serious. The situation outside is escalating. UA has been designated as a temporary shelter. For the time being, you will all remain here. Follow instructions, stay in designated areas, and do not engage with anyone outside the school grounds. The wild pussycats were also instructed to stay. Traveling back to their agency was deemed too dangerous. Koda, his small face pale, clung to Mandalay's leg. He kept glancing at Izuku, a worried frown creasing his brow. Izuku found himself constantly checking on Eri. She was still fragile, both physically and emotionally, and the news reports flashing on the common room television often frightened her. She would often seek him out, her small hand slipping into his. "Papa, what's happening?" she'd whisper, her big red eyes filled with fear. The endearment, "Papa," still made Izuku's heart swell with a mixture of warmth and responsibility. He'd never imagined being called that, especially not by someone as precious as Eri. He'd always tried his best to be there for her, to protect her from the lingering shadows of her past. Now, with this new, terrifying threat looming, that protectiveness intensified tenfold. He would kneel down, take her hands in his, and try to reassure her in a calm voice, even when his own heart was pounding with anxiety. Kota, witnessing these interactions, would often look away, a strange mix of longing and embarrassment on his face. He admired Izuku's strength and kindness, the way he cared for Eri. In his own way, Izuku had become a father figure to him too, someone who listened without judgment and offered quiet support. He wanted to call him Dad, or Papa too, but the words always caught in his throat. He was too old for that, he reasoned with himself, even though deep down he yearned for that connection. His feelings weren't entirely secret though. Mina, with her uncanny ability to read people, had already picked up on Kota's unspoken affection. Achiko had noticed it too, and even Kirishima had commented on how Kota seemed to gravitate towards Izuku. They'd exchanged knowing glances, a silent understanding passing between them. Everyone saw it, it seemed, except for the oblivious green-haired boy himself, who was too focused on ensuring everyone else was okay. Days bled into weeks. The outside world became a distant, horrifying echo. The internet flickered and died. News came sporadically through emergency radio broadcasts, painting a grim picture of society collapsing. Cities were overrun. The military was struggling. Hope seemed to be dwindling. Within UA, a new routine formed. Training became more focused on practical combat and survival skills. Food rations were implemented. Aizawa-sensei, with the help of other pro-heroes on staff, organized patrols around the school grounds. The initial fear began to morph into a grim determination. They were heroes in training, and even within the confines of their sanctuary, they would do everything they could to protect each other. Katsuki, despite his usual abrasive attitude, was surprisingly efficient during training exercises. His explosions were devastating against the makeshift zombie targets they used. He still barked orders and insults, calling Kirishima shitty hair, Kaminari dun cheeks, and Siro tape face, but there was a newfound intensity in his actions, a sense of grim purpose. Only Izuku remained Deku, a constant reminder of their complicated past. One evening, Izuku was helping Eri with her drawing in the common room. Kota was sitting nearby, pretending to read a manga, but his eyes kept flicking towards them. Mandalay smiled softly at Izuku. "He looks up to you, you know," she said quietly, nodding towards Kota. Izuku blinked, surprised. "Kota, really? I just try to be there for him." "He sees how you are with Eri," Mandalay explained. "He sees your strength, your kindness, he needs that right now." Before Izuku could fully process this, a loud siren blared through the UA campus. It was the emergency perimeter alarm. Aizawa-sensei's voice crackled over the intercom. "All students to the main courtyard immediately. We have a situation." Panic flared anew. They rushed outside, the night air thick with tension. Floodlights illuminated the massive gates of UA. Hordes of grotesque figures clawed and at the reinforced steel, their decaying hands reaching through any gap they could find. The air was thick with the stench of rot and decay. Pro-heroes stood guard along the walls, their faces grim. Snipe fired precise shots, taking down multiple figures with each bullet. Cementos was rapidly erecting additional barriers. Aizawa-sensei stood on a raised platform, his eyes scanning the crowd of students. "This," he said, his voice resonating with a chilling finality, "is what the outside world has become. All other major cities have fallen. Communication has ceased. As far as we can tell, UA is the last stronghold in Japan." A collective gasp rippled through the students. The weight of his words settled heavily upon them. They were no longer just students in a hero academy. They were the last bastion of hope in a country consumed by the living dead. Slowly, with a deafening groan of metal against metal, massive reinforced steel walls began to rise around the perimeter of UA, sealing them off from the horrors outside. As the final section locked into place, a profound silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the distant MMS of the undead. They were safe for now. But the reality of their isolation, their desperate situation, hung heavy in the air. Izuku looked at Eri, her small hand clutching his tightly, and then at Kota, who stood a little closer now, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. He knew with a chilling certainty that the kind, often timid boy he once was would need to change. To protect these two, to protect everyone within these walls, he would have to become something more. The whispers of the rotting world had finally reached their doorstep, and the fight for survival had just begun. Part 2. Whispers of the past. The weight of Aizawa-sensei's announcement hung heavy in the air. A chilling silence descended upon the courtyard, broken only by the distant groans of the undead. Then the dam broke. "My parents, they live in Tokyo," Mina whispered, her voice trembling. "I hope they're okay. I haven't been able to contact my family since the lockdown started," Tenya Ida said, his voice tight with worry. "I fear the worst. My grandpa lives in Yokohama," Achiko said, her eyes brimming with tears. "He's all alone." The students exchanged worried glances, each grappling with the terrifying reality of their situation. They were cut off, isolated, with no way of knowing what had become of their loved ones. Izuku surprisingly remained silent. He sat on a bench, Eri nestled in his lap, Koda huddled beside him, his eyes wide with fear. He watched his classmates, their faces etched with worry and grief, and a strange sense of calm settled over him. His mother, Inko Midoriya. The thought of her brought no pang of guilt or longing, only a chilling sense of relief. Inko had never been a loving mother. Her constant berating, her withering criticisms, the constant pressure to be normal, had left deep scars on his psyche. He'd always yearned for her approval, for her love, but it had never come. Now, with the world crumbling around them, he felt nothing. Not fear, not grief, not even the faintest flicker of regret. Just a strange sense of detachment. He forced a sad expression onto his face, mirroring the emotions of his classmates. "I am worried about my mom too," he murmured, his voice low. Koda, who had been watching him closely, reached out a hesitant hand and placed it on Izuku's. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're here for you." Izuku looked down at the small hand, surprised by the unexpected comfort. He gently squeezed Koda's hand in return. "Thank you, Koda," he said softly. "I appreciate it." He turned his attention to Eri, who was staring at the rising walls with wide, frightened eyes. "Eri," he said gently, "it's okay. We're safe here. Papa will always protect you." He pulled her closer, holding her tightly. Koda, emboldened by Izuku's touch, scooted closer as well, his small body seeking warmth and reassurance. Izuku wrapped an arm around both of them, feeling a surge of protectiveness. He would protect them no matter what. He would become their strength, their shield against the horrors of this new world. Meanwhile, Principal Nizu, ever the pragmatist, was already formulating a plan. He had summoned the remaining teachers and staff, his voice calm and collected despite the gravity of the situation. "We need to transform UA from a hero school into a self-sustaining city," he declared, his beady eyes gleaming. "We have the resources, the personnel, and the expertise to survive. But we must be prepared for the long haul." Aizawa, his face grim, nodded. "Food supplies, water purification, sanitation, these are immediate priorities." "Agreed," Nizu said. "The greenhouses can be expanded to produce food. We have rainwater collection systems and the technology to purify water. Sanitation will be crucial. We need to establish clear sanitation protocols and designate areas for waste disposal." "What about power?" Recovery Girl asked, her voice laced with concern. "The generators won't last forever." "We have solar panels and wind turbines," Nizu replied. "We need to maximize their efficiency and explore alternative energy sources. We also need to salvage any usable technology from the city before it's too late." "Weapons?" Aizawa said, his voice low. "We need to arm ourselves. The students need to be trained in combat, both hand-to-hand and with firearms." "I will oversee the weapons training," Aizawa declared. "We will utilize the existing training grounds and armories." "Good," Nizu said. "We also need to establish a communication system within the walls. And we need to explore the possibility of making contact with other survivors, if any exist." The meeting continued late into the night, a flurry of activity consuming the school. Teachers and staff were assigned tasks, students were organized into work groups. The once vibrant Hero Academy was being transformed into a fortress, a desperate haven in a world consumed by chaos. Izuku, watching from the sidelines, felt a strange sense of purpose. He was no longer just a student, a boy with a dream of becoming a hero. He was a survivor, a protector. And he would do everything in his power to ensure the safety of those he cared about. The world had changed and so had he. The next day, the reality of their situation truly began to sink in. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grim determination. Students, under the guidance of their teachers, began to assist with the various tasks. Kirishima, with his enhanced strength, helped to reinforce the walls. Mina, with her agility, assisted in the search for supplies. Tenya, ever the strategist, helped to organize the food distribution. Izuku, along with Kota and Eri, volunteered to help in the greenhouses. They planted seeds, tended to the existing crops, and learned about sustainable farming techniques. Kota, surprisingly, was a natural. He seemed to find a strange sense of peace in the repetitive tasks, his fear gradually subsiding. He even started to help Eri plant tiny sunflower seeds, his face softening as he watched her giggle with delight. As the day progressed, the once bustling Hero Academy began to resemble a small, isolated community. The laughter and chatter of students were replaced by a more subdued atmosphere, a quiet determination underlying their every action. They were no longer just classmates. They were survivors bound together by a shared fate. The walls, once a symbol of their isolation, now represented their last line of defense. They were trapped, but they were not defeated. They would fight, they would survive, and they would rebuild. Even in the face of unimaginable horror, the spirit of heroism, the unwavering longing to protect, still burned bright within them. Part 3. The hardening. The days following the sealing of UA's walls took on a new rhythm, a stark departure from the familiar routines of hero training. The initial shock had given way to a focused, almost grim determination. Survival was the new curriculum. Aizawa-sensei, true to his word, immediately began weapons training. The training grounds, once used for honing quirk control and hand-to-hand combat, now echoed with the sharp cracks of gunfire. Nizu had managed to secure a surprisingly large cache of firearms from various sources, police armories, self-defense stores, and even some confiscated villain tech that had projectile capabilities. The students were initially hesitant, their young hands feeling alien holding the cold steel of pistols and rifles. But the gravity of their situation quickly dispelled any squeamishness. They learned basic firearm safety, aiming techniques, and how to maintain their weapons. To everyone's surprise, Izuku displayed a natural aptitude for handling firearms. His years of meticulously analyzing hero fights, breaking down their movements and strategies, seemed to translate surprisingly well to combat with ranged weapons. He had a steady hand, a keen eye, and a remarkable ability to anticipate the trajectory and impact of his shots. Even Aizawa-sensei, rarely one for overt praise, offered a curt nod of approval after Izuku consistently hit bullseyes on the makeshift targets. "Not bad, problem child," he'd grunted, a hint of something akin to respect in his voice. Katsuki, of course, couldn't let this go unchallenged. "This is just got lucky, Deku." He'd snarled before unleashing a series of powerful explosions at his own target, obliterating it entirely. While his raw power was undeniable, his aim with a firearm was less precise than Izuku's calculated shots. As the weapons training intensified, so did the efforts to secure essential supplies. Food was the most pressing concern. Nizu, along with a small team of pro-heroes including Present Mike and Midnight, planned a supply run to nearby abandoned grocery stores and pharmacies. The risks were immense, but the dwindling rations within UA left them with little choice. Kota and Eri became even more attached to Izuku during this PRD. The thought of the outside world, filled with the grotesque creatures they glimpsed at the gates, terrified them. They clung to Izuku whenever he was near, Eri often burying her face in his leg, and Kota shadowing his every move. "Papa, don't go outside," Eri would plead, her voice small and trembling. Kota, trying to maintain a brave facade, would tug on Izuku's sleeve. "Be careful, Deku," he'd mumble, the use of his given name a sign of his underlying fear. Izuku would always kneel down, holding both of them close. "I won't go, you too," he'd reassure them, his voice gentle but firm. "I'll stay here and protect you. That's my job, right?" He'd offer them a small, reassuring smile, which seemed to ease their anxieties at least for a little while. Nizu also tasked the students with designing personal protective gear. Using the school's extensive resources, they were to create armor that could offer some defense against bites and scratches. The hero costume design labs were repurposed, now filled with sketches of practical, survival-oriented gear. Izuku's design was functional and strategic. He envisioned reinforced padding on vital areas like the neck, forearms, and legs, made from scavenged materials like thick leather and impact-resistant plastics. He incorporated pouches for carrying ammunition and essential tools. The overall look was less flashy than his hero costume, prioritizing practicality and mobility. Katsuki's design was predictably aggressive, incorporating sharp, reinforced gauntlets and a blast-resistant chest plate. The others came up with various designs, some focusing on agility, others on brute defense, each reflecting their individual quirks and fighting styles. A week passed in this tense, focused manner. The supply run team returned, thankfully, with a decent haul of non-perishable food, medical supplies, and other necessities. Present Mike recounted some harrowing encounters with the infected, his usual boisterous voice subdued with a hint of trauma. Then one afternoon, during a routine perimeter check by a group of third-year students and Snipe, a commotion erupted near the southern wall. Shouts echoed across the grounds, followed by the distinct sounds of gunfire. Everyone tensed, their hands instinctively reaching for the weapons they now carried. Aizawa-sensei swiftly mobilized a rescue team, including Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto Todoroki. They moved cautiously towards the breach, their senses on high alert. As they rounded a corner, they saw Snipe and the third years cautiously approaching two figures huddled near the base of the wall. One was a tall, muscular woman with long rabbit-like ears, her hero costume torn. The other was a woman with long, flowing purple hair that could transform into a dragon, also bearing signs of a recent struggle. "Mirko!" Kirishima exclaimed, recognizing the rabbit hero. "Ryukyu!" Yayarosa gasped, relief washing over her face. The two pro-heroes looked exhausted and wary but alive. They had somehow managed to evade the hordes and find their way to UA. "What happened?" Aizawa-sensei asked, his voice sharp and concerned. Mirko, breathing heavily, spoke first. "Ambush near Hosa City. We were trying to reach another shelter, it was overrun." Her eyes flashed with a fierce determination despite her exhaustion. "We barely made it." Ryukyu nodded, her expression grim. "The situation outside is far worse than we imagined. There are so many of them." A wave of mixed emotions washed over the students. Relief that these powerful heroes had found sanctuary, but also a stark reminder of the overwhelming danger that lurked beyond their walls. "They made it," Mina cried, relief evident in her voice. "Two more strong allies," Ida declared, his posture straightening with renewed hope. Katsuki, ever the pragmatist, simply grunted. More mouths to feed. But even he couldn't completely mask the flicker of respect in his eyes as he looked at the battle-worn heroes. Izuku, watching Eri and Kota peek out from behind his legs, felt a surge of determination. Mirko and Ryukyu's arrival was a stark reminder of the brutal reality they faced, but it also brought a sense of hope. They weren't alone in this fight. And he would be ready, stronger and more capable than ever, to face whatever came next. The hardening had begun, both within the walls of UA and within himself. Part 4. The weight of survival. The air in the UA auditorium was thick with a nervous energy. Principal Nizu stood on the stage, his small form casting a surprisingly authoritative shadow. "As our situation continues to evolve," he began, his voice amplified by the school's sound system, reaching every corner of the makeshift sanctuary, securing long-term sustainability is paramount. "We have made progress in establishing basic necessities, but to truly thrive, we need to expand our capabilities." He gestured to a series of blueprints projected onto a large screen. "Our priorities are clear: establishing larger-scale farming operations, enhancing our water purification systems, and bolstering our independent power generation. To achieve this, we require significant quantities of building materials, tools, and specialized equipment." Aizawa-sensei stepped forward. "A scouting and supply retrieval mission has been organized. A team will venture out to a known warehouse district approximately 20 kilometers from UA. This district was previously identified as a potential source of the materials we require." Murmurs rippled through the assembled students and pro-heroes. Going outside the walls was still a terrifying prospect. The selection process for this mission was based on a combination of combat proficiency, strategic thinking, and adaptability, Nizu continued. "After careful consideration, Izuku Midoriya has been chosen to lead this initial retrieval effort." A hush fell over the auditorium. Izuku, standing near the back with Eri and Kota clutching his hands, felt a wave of surprise and apprehension wash over him. "Midoriya has demonstrated exceptional resourcefulness and combat skills," Aizawa added, his gaze meeting Izuku's. "His performance during training and his analytical abilities make him the most suitable candidate for this crucial task." All Might clapped a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his usual booming voice slightly softer. "Young Midoriya, I have no doubt you will succeed. Remember everything you have learned and trust in your abilities." "Papa, be careful," Eri whispered, her grip tightening. Kota nodded silently, his eyes filled with concern. I will, Izuku promised them, squeezing their hands reassuringly. Mineta Minoru will accompany Midoriya, Nizu announced, his tone neutral. His quirk may prove useful in navigating certain obstacles. Mineta, who had been looking pale and fidgety, gulped audibly. The following morning, under a sky still tinged with the gray of early dawn, Izuku stood at the main gate, a backpack filled with essentials slung over his shoulder. He carried a rifle, its weight now familiar in his hands. Mineta stood beside him, looking like he might faint at any moment. Remember the route we discussed, Aizawa said, his gaze stern. Stick to the plan, avoid unnecessary risks and report back immediately if you encounter any significant threats. Yes, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku replied, his voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. As the massive gates creaked open, revealing the desolate landscape beyond, a chorus of well-wishes and warnings followed them. Be safe, Deku, Ochako called out. Don't do anything reckless, Baku bro, Kirishima shouted. Katsuki just offered a curt nod, his crimson eyes conveying a mixture of concern and grudging respect. The journey to the warehouse district was eerily quiet. Overgrown weeds cracked through the asphalt, and the skeletal remains of abandoned cars lined the streets. The silence was broken only by the crunch of their boots on debris and Mineta's near-constant whimpering. They reached the outskirts of the warehouse district without incident. Izuku moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. He'd learned to scan rooftops and shadows, to listen for the telltale MMMS and shuffling of the infected. As they approached a large, relatively intact-looking warehouse, Izuku spotted movement in the distance. A group of figures, clad in ragged clothing and carrying crude weapons, were scavenging through a ransacked store. Raiders. He'd heard the stories, desperate survivors who preyed on others. Stay behind me, Mineta, Izuku whispered, his hand instinctively tightening on his rifle. He considered trying to talk to them, to explain their situation and perhaps even trade. The old instinct to be helpful, to find a peaceful solution, still lingered. Hey, Izuku called out, raising his hands slowly, his rifle slung across his chest. We don't want any trouble. We're just looking for supplies. The figures stopped their scavenging and turned towards them. Their eyes were hard, their faces etched with desperation and suspicion. Without a word, one of them raised a makeshift crossbow and fired. The bolt whizzed past Izuku's head. There was no mistaking their intent. The old rules were gone. Kindness was weakness. Survival was the only law. With a heavy heart, Izuku reacted instantly. He dropped into a combat stance, raised his rifle and fired a controlled burst. 2 of the raiders fell instantly. The others, surprised by his swift and lethal response, charged. Mineta shrieked and scrambled behind an overturned dumpster, abandoning Izuku. Izuku moved with a grim efficiency he hadn't known he possessed. He used cover, his aim precise, taking down the remaining raiders one by one. The brief but brutal encounter left him shaken. He had taken human lives, something he had always hoped to avoid. But he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had done what was necessary to survive. He found Mineta cowering behind the dumpster. We need to go, Izuku said, his voice flat. I can't, Mineta stammered, his eyes wide with terror. I'm too scared. They'll come back, Izuku said, his patience wearing thin. We need to get the supplies and get back to UA. Mineta remained frozen. With a sigh of resignation, Izuku knew he couldn't rely on him. He'd have to do this alone. He entered the warehouse. It was a treasure trove of building materials. Stacks of lumber, bags of cement, rolls of wire, tools of all kinds. Exactly what they needed. As he began loading smaller items into his backpack, he heard the unmistakable groaning and shuffling of a large zombie horde approaching. He peered out a loading bay door and his BLD ran cold. A massive wave of the infected was shambling down the street, drawn by the sounds of the earlier confrontation. There was no time to lose. He spotted a forklift parked in a corner of the warehouse. An idea sparked in his mind. He jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling with the unfamiliar controls. After a few tense moments, the engine roared to life. He expertly maneuvered the forklift, using its prongs to lift large crates of supplies. He worked quickly, efficiently, loading the crates onto a large DLVRY truck parked inside the warehouse. He hotwired the truck, his mind racing. He had to get out of here and he had to bring these supplies back to UA. Back at the academy, the students and staff were on edge. They had heard the distant gunshots and were anxiously awaiting Izuku and Mineta's return. Suddenly, a lookout on the wall spotted a massive horde of zombies heading in their direction. "They're coming this way," the lookout yelled, his voice filled with panic. "A huge horde." Nizu immediately ordered everyone to battle stations. The pro-heroes and the more capable students took up positions along the walls, ready to defend their sanctuary. They tried to contact Izuku via their makeshift communication system, but there was no response. Fear began to grip the academy. Had the horde overwhelmed him? Had he and Mineta been caught outside? Deku Achiko whispered, her eyes wide with worry. "Bakubro wouldn't go down without a fight." Kirishima insisted, though his voice wavered slightly. Eri and Kota clung to Mandalay, their small bodies trembling. Papa Eri whimpered. Just as the first wave of zombies reached the base of the UA walls, a roar of an engine echoed in the distance. A large DLVRY truck, seemingly out of nowhere, barreled through the dense horde, its weight crushing the infected under its tires. Zombies flew left and right as the truck carved a path towards the gates. "What in the world?" Present Mike exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. As the truck drew closer, they could see a lone figure behind the wheel. "It's Midoriya," Aizawa said, his usual stoic expression betraying a hint of surprise. Nizu immediately ordered the gates to be opened. The truck rumbled through the opening, leaving a trail of mangled zombie corpses in its wake. Izuku brought the vehicle to a screeching halt in the courtyard. He climbed out, his clothes slightly torn, his face grim but resolute. The back of the truck was overflowing with building materials, tools, and other essential supplies. A stunned silence filled the courtyard. Then a wave of cheers erupted. Eri and Kota ran towards Izuku, launching themselves into his arms. "Papa, you're okay," Eri cried, tears streaming down her face. Kota hugged him tightly, burying his face in Izuku's leg. "Deku, you crazy bastard," Katsuki yelled, a rare hint of admiration in his voice. "Midoriya-kun, that was incredibly reckless," Ida exclaimed, his hand chopping the air. "But it worked." Mina cheered, her pink skin glowing with excitement. Nizu approached Izuku, his expression a mixture of surprise and approval. "Midoriya, you have exceeded all expectations." As the initial excitement subsided, Izuku's expression turned somber. "Mineta, he ran off when we were attacked by raiders," he said, his voice heavy. "I don't think he made it." He then recounted the encounter with the raiders, the difficult choice he had been forced to make. He explained how he had found the warehouse and the approaching horde, and the desperate gamble he had taken to secure the supplies. A heavy silence fell over the courtyard as Izuku spoke. The students and pro-heroes understood the weight of his words, the harsh realities of their new world. The loss of Mineta, while perhaps not mourned by all or none at all, was a stark reminder of the dangers they faced. And Izuku's actions, while heroic, also revealed a newfound ruthlessness, a willingness to do what was necessary to survive and protect those he cared for. Mirko, leaning against the wall, offered a curt nod. "Survival isn't pretty, kid. You did what you had to do." Ryukyu placed a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder. "You brought back what we need. That's what matters now." All Might looked at Izuku, a complex mix of pride and concern in his eyes. The kind, often timid boy he had mentored was still there, but beneath the surface, a hardened survivor was emerging. Later that evening, as the supplies were being unloaded and organized, Izuku sat with Eri and Kota in the common room. Eri was drawing a picture of a truck surrounded by colorful flowers, while Kota quietly read a book beside him. The weight of the day still pressed heavily on Izuku, but looking at their peaceful faces, he knew he had made the right choices. The world outside was brutal, but within these walls he would continue to fight, to protect, to be the father figure these two precious children needed. The cost of survival was high, but the will to live, and to protect those you loved, was even stronger. Part 5. The flickering light of a new society. The immediate aftermath of Izuku's daring supply run brought a renewed sense of hope, but also a stark awareness of the long road ahead. The warehouse hall provided a significant boost to their construction plans, and the arrival of Mirko and Ryukyu added invaluable strength and experience to their defenses. However, Principal Nizu understood that survival wasn't just about immediate needs. It was about building a sustainable future within the confines of UA's walls. A few days after Izuku's return, Nizu convened another assembly in the auditorium. The atmosphere was less tense than before, replaced by a cautious optimism. "My dear students and esteemed colleagues," Nizu began, his voice carrying a note of thoughtful deliberation, "we have proven our resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. However, to ensure our long-term viability, we must establish a functional internal economy. Bartering, while effective in the short term, lacks the stability required for a thriving community. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Therefore, I have decided to introduce a standardized form of internal currency, candles. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Candles. Nizu elaborated, candles are a readily producible resource, providing both light and a tangible representation of value. Their consumption can be managed and their production can be scaled as needed. This currency will facilitate trade, incentivize essential LBR, and allow for the development of internal services. He then outlined the initial wage structure, carefully considering the importance and risk associated with various roles. Those engaged in scavenging missions, venturing into the dangerous outside world, will earn approximately 60.8 candles per month. Our vital farmers, cultivating sustenance within our walls, will receive 53.4 candles monthly. Maintaining our clean water supply through purification efforts will yield 48.3 candles. The invaluable work of our medical professionals will be compensated at 44.3 candles. Ensuring our power remains operational will earn 32.1 candles. Those involved in construction and infrastructure development will receive 29.7 candles. Our security personnel, the pro heroes and designated students maintaining order, will earn 28.9 candles. Firefighters, ready to combat any internal hazards, will receive 27.6 candles. Our dedicated teachers, continuing to educate and guide our younger generations, will earn 26.9 candles. And finally, the crucial task of waste management will be compensated at 24.9 candles per month. Aizawa-sensei stepped forward. All pro heroes will be integrated into the security and teaching roles, utilizing their expertise where it is most needed. Furthermore, Nizu continued, students are encouraged to develop their own microeconomies. Individuals with skills or resources can establish businesses, offering goods and services to the community. This could include everything from maintaining salvaged car parts for potential future use, operating a radio entertainment program, running a small cafe using our limited ingredients, providing daycare services for younger children, offering photographic documentation of our community, providing haircuts, writing and distributing informational or fictional books, establishing trading posts for various goods, or even managing small-scale supermarkets by pooling and selling resources. The success and earnings of these ventures will depend entirely on their ability to meet the needs and desires of our community. He then addressed the concept of property. Designated living spaces within UA can now be considered owned through the expenditure of candles. Larger or more desirable spaces will naturally command a higher price. Similarly, land within our protected perimeter can be purchased for the purpose of establishing personal gardens or small workshops. The acquisition of other essential supplies will also be facilitated through this candle-based economy. As Nizu concluded, Izuku raised his hand hesitantly. Principal Nizu, he began, his voice respectful. With the rise of raiders and the potential for internal crime, I was wondering if we have considered establishing a form of justice system. Perhaps a prison for those who endanger our community, and maybe even a rehabilitation program for those who might be reformed. Nizu's eyes gleamed with intellectual curiosity. An astute observation, Midoriya. The establishment of social order is indeed crucial. Your suggestion regarding a detention facility and rehabilitative measures is something we will certainly explore. We will need to allocate resources, establish fair legal frameworks, and designate individuals to oversee such a system. Following the assembly, the student body buzzed with discussion about the new currency and the opportunities it presented. Candles, huh? Never thought I'd be paid in light, Kaminari chuckled. I wonder how much a decent cup of coffee will cost, Jiro mused. Achiko's eyes, however, had a distinct glint. Land ownership and businesses, she muttered, seemingly lost in thought. Her behavior in the days that followed began to shift. She became increasingly focused on acquiring candles, often trying to subtly manipulate others into giving her resources or overcharging for any small favors she offered. Her once cheerful demeanor seemed to be replaced by a calculating greed. Her initial attempts at establishing a small DLVRY service within UA were poorly managed, with her often losing track of orders and overpromising on DLVRY times, quickly leading to dissatisfied customers and a failed venture. Izuku, needing a steady income to support Eri and Koda, signed up for scavenging duty. The risks were high, but the potential earnings were the best available. He teamed up with a few of the braver third-year students, their combined quirks and skills offering a greater chance of survival outside the walls. The first few scavenging runs were terrifying but yielded valuable results. They managed to secure more building materials, tools, and even some preserved food items from abandoned stores and warehouses. Izuku's enhanced senses and analytical abilities proved invaluable in spotting potential dangers and locating useful supplies. He learned to move silently, to identify zombie patrol patterns, and to react quickly and decisively when confronted with threats, both living and undead. Meanwhile, the big three approached Izuku one afternoon as he was cleaning his scavenging gear. Midoriya, Mirio began, his usual boundless energy slightly subdued by the gravity of their situation. Your performance on that supply run was incredible. You showed a lot of courage and resourcefulness. Yeah, Deku, Nijire chimed in, her inquisitive eyes studying him intently. You seem different. More focused. Tamaki, as always, was more reserved. Your efficiency, it was necessary, he mumbled, his gaze shifting towards the ground. Izuku nodded, wiping down his rifle. We have to adapt, right? The world has changed. We can't afford to hesitate. But that ruthlessness you showed with the raiders, Mirio said, his brow furrowed with concern. Are you okay with that? Izuku paused, his gaze hardening slightly. No, he said honestly. It wasn't easy. But they attacked first. They wanted to hurt us. I had to protect myself and the possibility of a future for everyone here. Nijire tilted her head. It's just you always used to try and find another way. A kinder way. I still believe in that, Izuku said, meeting her gaze. But kindness can be a weakness in this new world. I have to be strong not just for myself but for Eri and Kota, for everyone here. If that means making difficult choices, then I will. The big three exchanged thoughtful glances. They saw the change in Izuku, the hardening of his resolve. It was a necessary evolution, born out of the harsh realities they now faced. Weeks turned into months. The candle-based economy slowly began to take shape within UA. Small businesses sprang up, offering various goods and services. A student with a knack for mechanics started a small workshop, repairing salvaged tools and equipment. Another with a talent for storytelling began broadcasting a regular radio drama, providing much-needed entertainment. A few students pooled their resources to open a small cafe, serving simple but appreciated meals. Achiko, however, continued to struggle. Her attempts at various businesses consistently failed due to her greed and poor management. She overpaid for initial supplies, inflated her prices to exorbitant levels, and offered unreliable service. As a result, she found herself with a dwindling supply of candles and mounting rent for her living space. Her increasingly desperate attempts to swindle others further isolated her from the community. Izuku, on the other hand, became a highly valued scavenger. His consistent hauls of valuable materials earned him a steady income of candles. He used his earnings wisely, ensuring Eri and Kota had comfortable living arrangements, nutritious food from the burgeoning farms, and access to any necessary supplies. He even purchased a small plot of land near the greenhouse, envisioning a small garden where Eri and Kota could play safely. One evening, as Izuku was returning from a particularly successful scavenging run, he saw Achiko arguing heatedly with one of the students who managed the living quarters assignments. Her face was flushed with anger and desperation. I'm telling you I can't afford this, she cried. Just give me a little more time. Uraraka-san, you haven't paid your rent in 2 months, the student replied patiently but firmly. We have a waiting list of people who need housing. Izuku watched from a distance, a sense of pity mixed with a lingering disappointment. He remembered the kind, bubbly girl he had once admired. The desperation of their situation had clearly brought out a darker side of her personality. Later, he saw Achiko packing her meager belongings, her face etched with despair. She had been evicted. No one offered her assistance. Her reputation for greed and dishonesty had left her isolated. The flickering light of the candles that now served as their currency illuminated the complex and evolving society within UA's walls. Hope and hardship coexisted, and the true character of each individual was being tested by the weight of survival. Izuku, once a hopeful but timid boy, was steadily forging himself into a protector, a provider, and a leader in this new, unforgiving world. The weight of his choices was heavy, but the faces of Eri and Kota, illuminated by the soft glow of their precious candles, reminded him of everything he was fighting for. Part 6. Shadows in the sky and a father's embrace. The fragile semblance of normalcy within UA's walls was about to be shattered by a new, terrifying evolution of the apocalypse. The initial wave of infected humans had been horrifying enough, but the relentless march of decay seemed to be twisting the very fabric of life itself. Whispers began circulating amongst the scavenging teams, unsettling reports of mutated creatures roaming the outskirts. Faster, stronger zombies with grotesque deformities. Animals exhibiting unnatural aggression and disturbing physical changes. At first, these reports were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations, the product of weary minds facing unimaginable horrors. But then came the day Izuku's scavenging team witnessed it firsthand. They were exploring an abandoned wildlife park a few kilometers from UA, hoping to salvage fencing and other useful materials. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, but amidst the familiar groans of the undead, they heard a new sound, a high-pitched screech, unlike anything they had encountered before. Looking up, they saw them. A flock of nightmarish creatures descended from the sky, their forms a grotesque fusion of avian and mammalian features. They possessed the skeletal head of a predator, complete with rows of sharp, decaying teeth, attached to a lean, muscular body covered in patchy, diseased fur. Leathery wings, far too large for their emaciated frames, beat with an unsettling power, carrying them through the air with terrifying speed. Their talons were long and sharp, and their screeches sent shivers down their spines. What are those things?" one of the third-year students whispered, his voice filled with horror. Izuku's mind raced, analyzing their anatomy, their movements. They were clearly once birds, but something had twisted them, amplified their predatory instincts, and given them a horrifying new form. "We need to get out of here," Izuku said urgently, his hand gripping his rifle tightly. Now. The mutated creatures, drawn by their presence, swooped down with alarming speed. Their attacks were swift and vicious, their talons tearing through clothing and flesh. The scavengers fought back desperately, their gunfire echoing through the deserted park, but the flying creatures were agile and difficult to hit. They managed to escape, but not without injuries and the chilling realization that the world outside was becoming even more dangerous. Back at UA, their report sent a wave of fear and unease through the community. Nizu immediately convened an emergency meeting. The description of the flying creatures sparked grim discussions among the pro-heroes. "Flying threats that changes everything," Hawks murmured, his own feathered wings twitching nervously. "Our perimeter walls won't protect us from the air," Aizawa said grimly. "We need to develop new defensive strategies." Mirko, her rabbit ears twitching with alertness, spoke with characteristic bluntness. "We need to hunt them. Find out their weaknesses. Can't let those things patrol the skies unchallenged." Ryukyu nodded in agreement, her dragon form briefly manifesting as if in response to the threat. "Aerial patrols will be necessary. We need to know where they are and how they operate." The focus of their efforts shifted. Scavenging missions became more cautious, with designated lookouts scanning the skies. Training regimens were adjusted to incorporate aerial combat strategies, utilizing quirks that offered flight or enhanced agility. Amidst the growing fear of these new threats, a small, heartwarming moment occurred. Izuku was helping Koda with his homework in the common room, Eri nestled between them, drawing in her sketchbook. Koda was struggling with a particularly difficult math problem, his brow furrowed in frustration. "It's okay, Koda," Izuku said gently, pointing to a section in the textbook. "Try looking at it this way." Koda followed his explanation, his eyes widening as the solution clicked into place. "Oh, I get it now, thanks, Dad." The word hung in the air, a small, unintentional slip. Koda's face flushed crimson, and he immediately clamped his hand over his mouth, his eyes darting around the room in embarrassment. Eri looked up, her head tilting in curiosity. Izuku froze for a moment, a warmth spreading through his chest. He looked at Koda's flustered face, at the genuine affection in his eyes. A soft smile touched his lips. "You're welcome, Koda," he said gently, choosing not to make a big deal of it. But inside, his heart swelled with a profound sense of love and responsibility. The unspoken bond they shared had finally found a voice. Unbeknownst to Izuku, his strength, his quiet determination, and his protective nature were starting to attract attention from some of the adult women within UA. Mirko often found herself observing his training, a grudging respect evident in her gaze. Ryukyu appreciated his level-headedness in stressful situations. Nijire was fascinated by his analytical mind and his evolving fighting style. Mandalay saw in him the unwavering dedication of a true hero, and Pixie Bob admired his gentle interactions with Eri and Koda. Even Ragdoll, with her energetic personality, found herself drawn to his quiet strength. Midnight, ever observant, noted the intensity in his eyes and the way he carried the weight of their survival on his young shoulders. These burgeoning feelings were often unspoken, a quiet undercurrent in the daily struggles for survival. The shared trauma and the close proximity within UA had forged unexpected bonds. However, Izuku himself remained largely oblivious to these developing affections. His focus was consumed by the safety and well-being of Eri and Kota, the success of their scavenging missions, and the constant need to adapt to the ever-increasing threats. He was still grappling with the emotional toll of the raider encounter, the weight of having taken human lives. Sleep often brought vivid nightmares, flashes of violence, and the haunting faces of those he had killed. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the echoes of gunfire ringing in his ears, and would often seek solace in checking on Eri and Kota, finding a measure of peace in their innocent slumber. He also carried the lingering trauma of his abusive upbringing. The relief he had initially felt at his mother's passing was often followed by waves of guilt and confusion. He knew logically that he was better off without her constant negativity, but years of ingrained emotional responses were not easily overcome. He found himself pushing away any attempts at close emotional connection, fearing vulnerability and the potential for the kind of pain his mother had inflicted. One evening, Aizawa-sensei found Izuku alone on the rooftop, overlooking the dimly lit courtyard. "Problem child," Aizawa said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Can't sleep." Izuku shook his head. "Just thinking." Aizawa leaned against the railing beside him. "This isn't easy. What we're going through, it leaves scars." Izuku hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I had to kill people, sensei. Raiders. They attacked us." "You defended yourself and your mission," Aizawa said, his gaze steady. "In this world, sometimes the lines between hero and survivor blur. Doing what you need to do to protect yourself and others isn't something to be ashamed of." "But it felt too easy," Izuku confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Like a SWCH flipped. I just reacted." "You're learning to survive, Midoriya," Aizawa said, his tone firm but understanding. "That instinct is necessary now. But don't let it consume you. Remember who you are, what you stand for." Their conversation was brief but offered a small measure of solace. Izuku knew Aizawa understood the burden he carried, the internal conflict he was facing. The appearance of the mutated flying creatures forced UA to adapt once again. Aerial patrols were established, utilizing heroes with flight capabilities like Hawks and Ryukyu, as well as students with suitable quirks. Defensive measures were implemented, including reinforcing rooftops and establishing designated safe zones during aerial attacks. The candle-based economy continued to evolve. Scavenging remained a high-risk, high-reward profession, and Izuku's consistent success made him a respected, if somewhat reserved, figure within the community. He used his earnings to ensure Eri and Kota's comfort and security, his every action driven by his fierce protectiveness of them. As the days bled into weeks, the world outside UA continued its descent into chaos. But within the walls, a fragile society was taking root, built on resilience, adaptation, and the flickering light of a new hard-won currency. And in the heart of it all, Izuku Midoriya, the once timid boy with a hero's dream, was learning to navigate the shadows of a broken world, his path illuminated by the unwavering love for his adopted family and the growing understanding of what it truly meant to survive. The sky held new terrors, but on the ground, a father's embrace offered a small measure of comfort and hope. Part 7. Fallen feathers and flickering screens. The midday sun cast long shadows across the UA courtyard as the community went about its routines. Farmers tended to the burgeoning crops in the expanded greenhouses, construction crews reinforced weaker sections of the inner walls, and students attended makeshift classes in repurposed classrooms. Izuku was meticulously cleaning his scavenging gear near his small property, the plot of land he had purchased, where Eri and Kota were carefully tending to a patch of sunflowers. Suddenly, a collective gasp rippled through the courtyard. All eyes turned skyward. A dark shape was plummeting from the clouds, trailed by several of the mutated avian creatures they had begun calling Sky Reapers. The falling figure was moving fast, too fast for a natural descent. "Someone's falling," Kirishima yelled, his hardening quirk activating instinctively. "It's Hawks," Yaoyorozu exclaimed, recognizing the distinctive red wings, now tattered and torn. He was desperately trying to maneuver, but the Sky Reapers were relentless, their screeching cries echoing ominously. Without hesitation, Izuku and Shoto reacted. Years of ingrained hero training took over. Izuku shouldered his rifle, his enhanced vision tracking the erratic movements of the Sky Reapers. Shoto, his eyes narrowed, unleashed a torrent of ice, creating a temporary barrier to distract the creatures and slow their pursuit. "Izuku now." Shoto yelled, his voice cutting through the rising panic. Izuku didn't need to be told twice. With practiced precision he fired a series of controlled shots. Two of the Sky Reapers shrieked and plummeted from the sky, their unnatural flight abruptly ended. Shoto followed up with blasts of fire, incinerating the remaining creatures that dared to come closer to the falling hero. Hawks crashed hard in the training grounds, a cloud of dust and debris erupting upon impact. His wings were twisted at unnatural angles and he lay motionless. Aizawa-sensei was the first to reach him, his capture weapon at the ready, assessing the situation. Recovery Girl and several medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers. They carefully loaded the injured hero and carried him to the infirmary. Principal Nizu arrived shortly after, his expression a rare display of shock. Hawks, but we believed he was lost when the initial outbreak occurred. There were no communications. The infirmary became a scene of quiet urgency as Recovery Girl worked tirelessly on Hawk's injuries. His wings were badly damaged, and he had sustained several other fractures and lacerations. Hours passed before he finally regained consciousness. Nizu was among the first to speak with him. "Hawks," he said gently, "it is remarkable to see you alive. What happened? We had presumed the worst." Hawk's voice was weak and raspy. "It was chaos. The hero commission, they were overwhelmed. I tried to evacuate as many as I could, but the numbers, they were endless. I was separated, thought I was the only one left in that sector." He recounted harrowing tales of narrow escapes and constant struggle for survival, explaining how he had been relentlessly pursued by the mutated birds for days, his injuries finally leading to his desperate fall. The news of Hawk's survival and his terrifying encounter with the Sky Reapers reinforced the grim reality of their situation. The world outside was not just overrun, it was evolving into something even more dangerous. In the relative safety of UA, Izuku found himself increasingly longing for a connection to the past, a sense of normalcy that seemed to be slipping further away each day. He missed the simple pleasure of watching television, of escaping into stories and familiar characters. "Papa, what's TV?" Eri asked one evening, watching Izuku stare wistfully at a blank screen in the common room. Kota, sitting beside him, nodded in agreement. He barely remembered what television was like. Izuku smiled sadly. It was a way to watch stories, news, funny shows like movies, but they came on every day or every week. He tried to explain the concept, the flickering images, the sounds, the way it could transport you to another world. An idea sparked in his mind. He had a collection of DVDs, old hero documentaries, silly anime, even some classic movies All Might had recommended. And he had downloaded a vast library of digital media onto his old laptop before the world went dark. Maybe I can try to set something up," he murmured, more to himself than to the children. "A way for us to watch TV again." The task was daunting. He needed to find a functioning power source that could run a screen and speakers consistently. He needed to figure out how to connect his old devices. It could take months, perhaps even longer, to gather the necessary components and overcome the technical challenges. But the thought of bringing back this small piece of the past, of sharing these stories with Eri and Kota and the rest of the community, gave him a renewed sense of purpose. It became his long-term project, a quiet mission amidst the daily fight for survival. Life within UA continued its strange rhythm. The candle economy flourished, with various businesses finding their niche. The student who repaired car parts found a steady stream of customers as people tried to maintain the few salvaged vehicles within the walls. The radio show became a popular form of evening entertainment, offering news updates, music from scavenged records and digital files, and even dramatic readings. The cafe, despite its limited menu, provided a welcome social hub. Achiko's situation, however, went from bad to worse. Unable to secure stable employment or manage her finances, she became increasingly desperate. Her attempts to borrow candles were met with wary refusals. Her once bright eyes now held a hard, resentful glint. She often muttered about the unfairness of it all, blaming others for her misfortunes. One afternoon, Kota was helping Izuku in his small garden, carefully watering the young sunflower plants. He looked up at Izuku, his small face earnest. "Dad," he said clearly without any trace of embarrassment, "can we plant more flowers? Eri likes the yellow ones." Izuku's heart swelled. He ruffled Kota's hair, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Of course, Kota. We can plant as many yellow flowers as Eri wants." The casual use of "Dad" no longer surprised him. It felt natural, right? Hawks, slowly recovering in the infirmary, became a source of valuable intelligence about the outside world. He confirmed the fall of major cities and the widespread mutation of both humans and animals. His insights into the Sky Reaper's behavior and potential weaknesses proved crucial for developing better defense strategies. More survivors occasionally found their way to UA's gates, small groups, often traumatized and desperate. They brought with them more stories of the horrors they had witnessed and sometimes valuable skills or resources. A former bank teller helped Nizu refine the candle currency system and establish a basic ledger. A retired electrician proved invaluable in maintaining and expanding their power grid. Each new arrival added to the complex tapestry of life within the last bastion of hope in Japan. Despite the constant challenges and the ever-present threat of the outside world, a sense of community continued to grow within UA. They were bound together by shared hardship and a common goal, survival. And in the midst of it all, Izuku Midoriya, the scavenger, the protector, the makeshift father, was steadily finding his place, his strength forged in the fires of a world consumed by darkness, his path illuminated by the flickering promise of a better tomorrow, and perhaps the warm glow of a television screen in the not-too-distant future. Part 8. The Long Road to the Chinook. Chapter 1. The midday sun cast long shadows across the UA courtyard as the community went about its routines. Farmers tended to the burgeoning crops in the expanded greenhouses, construction crews reinforced weaker sections of the inner walls, and students attended makeshift classes in repurposed classrooms. Izuku was meticulously cleaning his scavenging gear near his small property, the plot of land he had purchased, where Eri and Kodo were carefully tending to a patch of sunflowers. Suddenly, a collective gasp rippled through the courtyard. All eyes turned skyward. A dark shape was plummeting from the clouds, trailed by several of the mutated avian creatures they had begun calling Sky Reapers. The falling figure was moving fast, too fast for a natural descent. Someone's falling. Kirishima yelled, his hardening quirk activating instinctively. It's Hawks. Yaoyorozu exclaimed, recognizing the distinctive red wings, now tattered and torn. He was desperately trying to maneuver, but the Sky Reapers were relentless, their screeching cries echoing ominously. Without hesitation, Izuku and Shoto reacted. Years of ingrained hero training took over. Izuku shouldered his rifle, his enhanced vision tracking the erratic movements of the Sky Reapers. Shoto, his eyes narrowed, unleashed a torrent of ice, creating a temporary barrier to distract the creatures and slow their pursuit. Izuku now! Shoto yelled, his voice cutting through the rising panic. Izuku didn't need to be told twice. With practiced precision he fired a series of controlled shots. Two of the Sky Reapers shrieked and plummeted from the sky, their unnatural flight abruptly ended. Shoto followed up with blasts of fire, incinerating the remaining creatures that dared to come closer to the falling hero. Hawks crashed hard in the training grounds, a cloud of dust and debris erupting upon impact. His wings were twisted at unnatural angles and he lay motionless. Aizawa-sensei was the first to reach him, his capture weapon at the ready, assessing the situation. Recovery Girl and several medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers. They carefully loaded the injured hero and carried him to the infirmary. Principal Nizu arrived shortly after, his expression a rare display of shock. Hawks, but we believed he was lost when the initial outbreak occurred. There were no communications. The infirmary became a scene of quiet urgency as Recovery Girl worked tirelessly on Hawk's injuries. His wings were badly damaged, and he had sustained several other fractures and lacerations. Hours passed before he finally regained consciousness. Nizu was among the first to speak with him. "Hawks," he said gently, "it is remarkable to see you alive. What happened? We had presumed the worst." Hawk's voice was weak and raspy. "It was chaos. The hero commission, they were overwhelmed. I tried to evacuate as many as I could, but the numbers, they were endless. I was separated, thought I was the only one left in that sector." He recounted harrowing tales of narrow escapes and constant struggle for survival, explaining how he had been relentlessly pursued by the mutated birds for days, his injuries finally leading to his desperate fall. The news of Hawk's survival and his terrifying encounter with the Sky Reapers reinforced the grim reality of their situation. The world outside was not just overrun, it was evolving into something even more dangerous. In the relative safety of UA, Izuku found himself increasingly longing for a connection to the past, a sense of normalcy that seemed to be slipping further away each day. He missed the simple pleasure of watching television, of escaping into stories and familiar characters. "Papa, what's TV?" Eri asked one evening, watching Izuku stare wistfully at a blank screen in the common room. Koda, sitting beside him, nodded in agreement. He barely remembered what television was like. Izuku smiled sadly. It was a way to watch stories, news, funny shows like movies, but they came on every day or every week. He tried to explain the concept, the flickering images, the sounds, the way it could transport you to another world. An idea sparked in his mind. He had a collection of DVDs, old hero documentaries, silly anime, even some classic movies All Might had recommended. And he had downloaded a vast library of digital media onto his old laptop before the world went dark. Maybe I can try to set something up, he murmured, more to himself than to the children. A way for us to watch TV again. The task was daunting. He needed to find a functioning power source that could run a screen and speakers consistently. He needed to figure out how to connect his old devices. It could take months, perhaps even longer, to gather the necessary components and overcome the technical challenges. But the thought of bringing back this small piece of the past, of sharing these stories with Eri and Koda and the rest of the community, gave him a renewed sense of purpose. It became his long-term project, a quiet mission amidst the daily fight for survival. Life within UA continued its strange rhythm. The candle economy flourished, with various businesses finding their niche. The student who repaired car parts found a steady stream of customers as people tried to maintain the few salvaged vehicles within the walls. The radio show became a popular form of evening entertainment, offering news updates, music from scavenged records and digital files, and even dramatic readings. The cafe, despite its limited menu, provided a welcome social hub. Achiko's situation, however, went from bad to worse. Unable to secure stable employment or manage her finances, she became increasingly desperate. Her attempts to borrow candles were met with wary refusals. Her once bright eyes now held a hard, resentful glint. She often muttered about the unfairness of it all, blaming others for her misfortunes. One afternoon, Koda was helping Izuku in his small garden, carefully watering the young sunflower plants. He looked up at Izuku, his small face earnest. "Dad," he said clearly without any trace of embarrassment, "can we plant more flowers? Eri likes the yellow ones." Izuku's heart swelled. He ruffled Koda's hair, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Of course, Koda. We can plant as many yellow flowers as Eri wants." The casual use of "Dad" no longer surprised him. It felt natural, right? Hawks, slowly recovering in the infirmary, became a source of valuable intelligence about the outside world. He confirmed the fall of major cities and the widespread mutation of both humans and animals. His insights into the Sky Reaper's behavior and potential weaknesses proved crucial for developing better defense strategies. More survivors occasionally found their way to UA's gates, small groups, often traumatized and desperate. They brought with them more stories of the horrors they had witnessed and sometimes valuable skills or resources. A former bank teller helped Nizu refine the candle currency system and establish a basic ledger. A retired electrician proved invaluable in maintaining and expanding their power grid. Each new arrival added to the complex tapestry of life within the last bastion of hope in Japan. Despite the constant challenges and the ever-present threat of the outside world, a sense of community continued to grow within UA. They were bound together by shared hardship and a common goal, survival. And in the midst of it all, Izuku Midoriya, the scavenger, the protector, the makeshift father, was steadily finding his place, his strength forged in the fires of a world consumed by darkness, his path illuminated by the flickering promise of a better tomorrow, and perhaps the warm glow of a television screen in the not-too-distant future. Next, and in this chapter, make it that this is part 1 of a journey to get a Boeing CH-47F Chinook helicopter so they could look for supplies in other cities, and they look for it at an old army base, but it is on the other side of the city, so it could take a very long time to get there because of the monsters, and at the end of the chapter they make it halfway there before setting up camp and they have to face Raiders are people how attack camps and kill and steal, zombies and Sky Reapers. And make it very dramatic and make this chapter 3,000 words and only people the job as scavengers, and make this part 5,000 words and have it that there is a lot of talking and they start seeing weird thing and Izuku starts shooting the zombies. He sees there are the normal zombies that run and walk like a normal human and take about 3 shots to the body to kill or 1 shot to the head. Then there are fat zombies that are slow but are strong and it takes 6 shots to the body or 3 shots to the head to kill. Then there are the more athletic zombies that can outrun some cars and catch some humans, but they are not very strong and it takes 2 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head to kill. Part 8. The Long Road to the Chinook. Chapter 1. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the faces gathered in the makeshift war room. Principal Nizu, Aizawa-sensei, Mirko, Ryukyu, Hawks, still recovering but insistent on contributing, and a select group of experienced scavenger leaders, including Izuku. The air was thick with the weight of their ambition and the inherent danger of their plan. Our long-term survival necessitates expanding our search for resources beyond the immediate vicinity of UA, Nizu stated, his voice serious. The discovery of the helicopter at the old Muzutafu military base offers a potential solution for large-scale supply runs and reconnaissance. A map, salvaged from the school library, was spread across the table, marked with a perilous route across the ravaged cityscape. The military base was located on the far side of what was once a sprawling metropolis, a journey fraught with unknown dangers. The distance is significant, Aizawa pointed out, his gaze tracing the marked path. We will encounter dense urban areas likely teeming with infected. And the rise of the Sky Reapers adds a new dimension of threat. But a Chinook, Hawks interjected, his voice still a little weak but filled with a spark of hope. That could carry a massive payload. We could bring back enough supplies to truly secure our future. Mirko slammed a fist on the table. Then let's go. Sitting around here waiting to be picked off isn't my idea of fun. We need a well-equipped team, Nizu cautioned. Individuals with proven scavenging skills, combat prowess, and the ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. Given the nature of the threats, this initial expedition will be comprised solely of our most experienced scavengers. After careful deliberation, the team was assembled. Izuku, whose analytical mind and surprising proficiency with firearms had made him an invaluable asset. Bakugo, whose explosive power offered significant offensive capability, albeit with a volatile temperament. Shoto, whose versatile ice and fire quirks provided both offense and defense. Kirishima, whose hardening quirk offered crucial protection. And a handful of the most reliable third-year scavengers. The following morning, under a sky still haunted by the occasional screech of a Sky Reaper, the team stood at the reinforced gates, their backpacks loaded with supplies, a grim determination etched on their faces. Eri and Kota clung tightly to Izuku's legs, their small faces filled with worry. "Dad, please be careful," Kota whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Papa, come back soon," Eri pleaded, her red eyes wide. Izuku knelt down, holding them both close. "I will. I promise. We're doing this to make things better for all of us." He offered them a reassuring smile, though a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. The gates opened, revealing the desolate streets. Their journey had begun. The initial miles were relatively uneventful, the familiar shambling forms of standard zombies their primary adversaries. Izuku, ever observant, began to categorize their movements and resilience. He noted the slow, lumbering gait of what he mentally labeled walkers, easily dispatched with a single headshot or a few well-placed body shots. Then there were the runners, exhibiting a disturbing semblance of their former human speed, requiring quicker reflexes and more accurate aim. Finally, he'd witnessed the lumbering, grotesque tanks, bloated figures that absorbed multiple rounds before finally succumbing. "Keep your eyes peeled," Izuku warned his team, relaying his observations. "Walkers are slow but they can swarm you. Runners are fast, aim for the head. And tanks focus fire, headshots are best." Bakugo scoffed. "This is like I need your DMN analysis, Deku. I'll just blow 'em all to hell." "Efficiency is key, Bakugo," Shoto countered calmly, freezing a group of approaching walkers with a precise blast of ice before shattering them with a burst of flame. As they ventured deeper into the ruined city, the signs of past life became more frequent: overturned cars, abandoned buildings, the ghostly remnants of a once bustling metropolis. The silence was punctuated by the MMMS of the undead and the occasional screech of a distant Sky Reaper. They encountered their first group of raiders on the outskirts of a deserted shopping mall. The scavengers were attempting to loot what remained of a pharmacy when a group of heavily armed figures emerged from the shadows. Well, what do we have here?" their leader sneered, brandishing a crude but menacing-looking pipe weapon. "Looks like some fresh meat come to play." Izuku tried to de-escalate the situation. "We don't want any trouble," he said, his hands raised slowly. "We're just passing through." The raiders laughed, their eyes glinting with malice. "Passing through with those packs? Think we're stupid? Drop your gear and maybe we'll let you live." Negotiation was clearly not an option. The raiders opened fire with a volley of makeshift projectiles. "Scatter!" Izuku yelled. The scavengers dove for cover, returning fire. Bakugo's explosions ripped through the raiders' ranks, forcing them to retreat. Shoto's ice walls provided temporary barriers, while Kirishima's hardened form absorbed several glancing blows. Izuku's controlled burst from his rifle took down two of the attackers. The skirmish was brutal and fast, a stark reminder of the human predators that now roamed the wasteland. They managed to fend off the raiders, but not without sustaining minor injuries and expending valuable ammunition. As they pressed further into the city's heart, the zombie encounters became more frequent and more varied. They navigated through hordes of walkers clogging the streets, narrowly avoided packs of runners sprinting through alleyways, and had to strategically maneuver around lumbering tanks blocking their path. Izuku's meticulous observations proved invaluable, allowing them to anticipate threats and conserve their resources. The signs of mutation were becoming more prevalent. They saw runners with elongated limbs, moving with unnatural agility. They encountered tanks with hardened, bony protrusions, offering them even greater protection. The virus was clearly evolving, making their already perilous journey even more dangerous. The Sky Reapers became a constant aerial threat. Their screeching cries served as a chilling reminder of their presence. On several occasions, the team had to take cover as the winged predators circled overhead, their shadows falling like harbingers of doom. Shoto's ice proved effective in deterring them, creating sharp, jagged formations that made landing treacherous. As dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows across the ruined cityscape, the team reached the halfway point marked on their map, a relatively intact office building that offered a defensible position for the night. They cleared the lower floors, securing entry points and setting up a perimeter watch. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them. The constant tension, the brutal encounters, and the oppressive atmosphere of the dead city had taken their toll. They ate their meager rations in silence, the flickering beams of their flashlights cutting through the gloom. "We need to be extra vigilant tonight," Izuku warned, his voice low. "Raiders know that travelers will seek shelter at night. And those flying things, they might be more active in the dark." Their first night in the ruined city was filled with unease. The MMMS of nearby zombies echoed through the empty streets, punctuated by the occasional distant screech of a Sky Reaper. They took shifts maintaining watch, their senses strained, their weapons ready. Just before dawn, as the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, their perimeter alarms, makeshift tripwires connected to empty cans, jingled violently. "Raiders," a third-year student on watch hissed. "At least a dozen." The team sprang into action, taking up defensive positions. The Raiders, a larger and more organized group than the first, attacked with surprising ferocity, using the pre-dawn darkness to their advantage. Gunfire erupted, illuminating the ruined street in brief, violent flashes. Bakugo's explosions roared, tearing through the Raiders' ranks, but they pressed forward relentlessly. Kirishima stood as a hardened bulwark, deflecting blows and protecting his teammates. Shoto unleashed walls of ice and blasts of fire, creating choke points and thinning the enemy numbers. Izuku moved strategically, using cover and firing controlled bursts, targeting the Raiders' leaders and those who posed the greatest threat. He saw one of the Raiders attempting to flank their position and took him down with a precise shot to the head. The fight was a chaotic blur of violence, the desperation of both sides fueling their aggression. Just as it seemed the Raiders might overwhelm them, a new sound pierced the din of battle, the unmistakable screech of multiple Sky Reapers descending rapidly. The Raiders, caught between the scavengers and the airborne predators, panicked. Their coordinated attack dissolved into a desperate scramble for survival. The Sky Reapers swooped down, their talons tearing into the Raiders. The scavengers, momentarily stunned by this unexpected intervention, quickly realized their advantage. They focused their fire on the remaining Raiders, picking them off as they tried to flee the aerial assault. The battle ended as quickly as it began, leaving a scene of carnage in the pre-dawn light. The bodies of Raiders were strewn across the street, some bearing the gruesome wounds of Sky Reaper attacks. The scavengers were battered and bruised, their ammunition depleted, but they had survived. As the sun finally broke the horizon, casting its pale light over the ravaged city, they surveyed the scene. The encounter had been brutal, a stark reminder of the constant threats they faced. The journey to the Chinook would be long and arduous, and the dangers were far greater than they had initially anticipated. But they had made it halfway. They would rest, resupply with what little they had left, and steel themselves for the even more perilous journey ahead. The hope of the helicopter, of a chance to truly secure their future, was the only light guiding them through the darkness of this broken world. Part 9. The Long Road to the Chinook. Chapter 2. The morning after the brutal Raider attack dawned with a heavy silence, broken only by the distant MMMS of the undead and the rustling of wind through the skeletal remains of buildings. The scavengers were weary, their bodies aching, but a grim determination fueled their resolve. They bandaged their wounds, redistributed their remaining ammunition, and prepared to continue their journey. As they navigated through a particularly overgrown section of what was once a park, Izuku spotted movement in the undergrowth. It was unlike the jerky, unnatural gait of the zombies. This creature moved with a fluid, almost feline grace. It was smaller than he initially thought, roughly the height of a large dog, but its build was powerful, its limbs ending in sharp, wickedly curved claws. Its head was reptilian, with glowing yellow eyes that held an unsettling intelligence. It resembled the mutated creatures from old video games, something akin to the dreaded Deathclaw, but smaller and, as they soon discovered, surprisingly timid. The creature limped into a small clearing, its flank bearing a deep gash that oozed a dark fluid. It was thin, its ribs visible beneath its scaly hide, and its breathing was shallow. It looked more scared than aggressive. Izuku, despite the inherent danger, felt a pang of sympathy. He remembered Kota's love for animals, the innocent creatures caught in this horrific apocalypse. Slowly, cautiously, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a portion of their dried rations. "Stay back," he murmured to his team, his eyes fixed on the creature. He tossed the food a few feet away. The mutated animal flinched, its yellow eyes darting nervously between Izuku and the offering. Hunger eventually won over fear. It crept forward, snatched the food in its sharp jaws and devoured it quickly. Izuku approached slowly, speaking in a soft, soothing voice. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The creature remained wary but didn't flee. Izuku noticed a large splinter embedded in its wounded flank. With careful movements, he reached out and gently removed it. The creature whined softly but didn't attack. He then used a strp of clean cloth from his pack to loosely bandage the wound. The mutated animal looked up at Izuku, its yellow eyes seeming to soften. It tentatively licked his hand with a rough tongue, a gesture that surprised and touched Izuku. It then turned and, with a final glance, disappeared back into the undergrowth. "What the hell was that, Deku?" Bakugo growled, his hand never straying far from his grenade gauntlet. "You gone soft on mutant lizards now." "It was hurt and hungry," Izuku replied quietly. "It wasn't aggressive. It just needed help." Shoto nodded slowly. It seemed intelligent, almost grateful. They continued their journey, the encounter leaving a strange impression on them. The apocalypse had twisted life in unimaginable ways, but perhaps not all mutations meant mindless aggression. Later that day, as they navigated a wide, open avenue, they saw it, a horde of unprecedented size. Hundreds, maybe thousands of zombies, a writhing mass of decaying flesh stretching as far as the eye could see. Walkers, runners, and lumbering tanks moved together in a terrifying, unified mass, drawn by some unknown stimulus. "DMN it," Bakugo cursed. "Where did all these DMN extras come from?" "We can't fight our way through that," Shoto said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We need to find cover now." They scrambled towards the nearest defensible structure, a boarded-up bus that offered minimal protection. The horde surged closer, their MMMs and groans creating a deafening cacophony. The bus rocked violently as the first wave of zombies slammed against its metal sides. They were trapped, their ammunition dwindling rapidly. "This is it," Kirishima muttered, his hardening quirk fully engaged as he braced against the door. "This is how it ends." The scavengers watched in stunned silence as the creature single-handedly held back the tide of zombies directly assaulting the bus. It roared, a guttural sound that echoed through the horde's MMMs, drawing their attention and their aggression. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the horde began to thin, the sheer number of undead overwhelming even the mutated creature's ferocity. It was injured, its movements becoming slower, but it had bought them precious time. Once the immediate threat subsided, the creature, panting heavily, turned towards the bus. Its yellow eyes locked onto Izuku. It limped towards him, nudging his hand with its snout, a strange, almost dog-like whine escaping its throat. "It had saved us," one of the third-year students stammered, his voice filled with awe. The mutated animal then did something even more unexpected. It licked Izuku's face with its rough tongue, its earlier wariness completely gone. It nudged him again, then sat down beside him, its intelligent eyes fixed on him with an undeniable loyalty. Bakugo stared, dumbfounded. "The hell? That DMN lizard, it's acting like a DMN puppy." Izuku cautiously reached out and stroked the creature's scaly head. It leaned into his touch, a low purring sound rumbling in its chest. He didn't understand it, but there was a clear connection, a strange bond forged by a moment of kindness. "I think it wants to come with us," Izuku said softly. Despite the inherent risks of traveling with a mutated animal, the creature had undeniably saved their lives. Its ferocity against the zombies was a valuable asset. After a brief discussion, the team cautiously agreed to let it accompany them. They nicknamed it Claw. With Claw now a strange and formidable member of their team, they continued their journey towards the military base. The presence of the loyal mutated creature offered a sliver of hope in the overwhelming darkness, a testament to the unexpected connections that could form even in the most desolate of circumstances. The road ahead remained long and dangerous, but with a newfound ally by their side, their chances of reaching the Chinook had perhaps just slightly improved. Part 10. The Long Road to the Chinook. Chapter 3. The skeletal remains of the Muzutafu military base loomed before them under the pale afternoon sky. Chain-link fences, rusted and torn in places, surrounded a collection of dilapidated buildings and overgrown runways. The air hung heavy with the silence of abandonment, a stark contrast to the groaning hordes they had navigated to get there. "This is it," Bakugo grunted, his eyes scanning the deserted compound. "Looks like a DMN ghost town." "Stay vigilant," Shoto cautioned, his senses on high alert. There could still be infected lurking within the buildings. Claw, their unlikely guardian, padded silently beside Izuku, its reptilian head twitching, its yellow eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Its presence had become a strange source of comfort, its fierce loyalty unwavering. They cautiously breached the perimeter fence, moving through the deserted grounds. The hangars were massive, their metal doors hanging crookedly or lying completely detached. Inside, amidst the dust and debris of forgotten military hardware, they found it, a Boeing C-47F Chinook helicopter. It was large and imposing, its twin rotors casting long shadows in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. It looked surprisingly intact, though coated in a thick layer of dust. A wave of relief washed over the team. They had made it. They had found what they were looking for. But the relief was short-lived. As they climbed into the cockpit, a chilling realization dawned on them. None of them knew how to fly a helicopter. A heavy silence descended upon the group. The complexity of the controls, the myriad of dials and switches, was overwhelming. The dream of soaring above the ravaged landscape, of easily transporting vast amounts of supplies, crashed down to earth with a resounding thud. "Well, this is just great," Bakugo snarled, slamming his fist against the control panel. "We go through all that CRP and for what? A giant metal paperweight." "There has to be a manual," Izuku said, his mind racing. He began frantically searching the cockpit, pulling out tattered documents and binders. Hours passed in a frustrating flurry of searching and deciphering. They found maintenance logs, technical specifications, but no clear how-to-fly guide. Hawks, despite his extensive knowledge of aerial movement, had no experience with helicopters. The weight of their predicament settled heavily upon them. They had reached their goal, but it seemed unattainable. As dusk began to fall, they secured the helicopter as best they could and set up a perimeter inside the hangar. The mood was somber. The initial elation had been replaced by frustration and a growing sense of despair. "Maybe there's something in the base's administrative buildings," Shoto suggested, his voice quiet. Personnel files, training manuals, a small search party, including Izuku and Shoto, ventured out into the twilight. The administrative buildings were in worse shape than the hangars, ransacked and decaying. After a tense search, Izuku stumbled upon a locked office. Using Kirishima's hardened strength, they managed to force the door open. Inside, amidst the scattered papers and overturned furniture, they found a small water-damaged duffel bag. And inside the bag, miraculously intact, was a pilot's operating manual for the Chinook. A collective sigh of relief swept through the team when Izuku returned with the manual. Hope flickered anew. Hawks, despite his injuries, eagerly began to study the diagrams and instructions, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's complex," he admitted after hours of poring over the manual. "But the principles of flight, I can grasp them. It will take time, practice." "We don't have much time," Bakugo interjected, his gaze nervously flicking towards the hangar doors. The MMS of nearby zombies seemed to be growing louder. Their apprehension was soon realized. A low, guttural roar echoed from outside, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a large horde approaching. The metal doors of the hangar rattled violently as the undead pressed against them. "They found us," Kirishima growled, his hardening quirk activating. "We need to get out of here." Panic began to set in. The dream of escape by air was still fragile, dependent on Hawk's ability to MSTR the complex controls. "Hawks, how long?" Nizu's voice crackled over their makeshift radio communication, a salvaged military walkie-talkie. They had managed to establish a tenuous link back to UA to update them on their progress. "Not long enough," Hawks replied grimly, his eyes scanning the manual. I understand the basics, but actual flight it's another matter. We need to load supplies, Izuku yelled, his mind racing. Every bit we can carry. A chaotic scramble ensued. They began hauling crates of salvaged military rations, medical supplies, and tools towards the helicopter, working with frantic speed. Claw, sensing the urgency, stood guard at the hangar doors, its guttural roars and vicious attacks keeping the encroaching zombies at bay. Everyone inside. Izuku shouted as the last of the supplies were crammed into the Chinook's cargo hold. The team clambered aboard. Hawks took the pilot's seat, his face a mask of intense concentration. The rotors began to spin, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, the powerful engines roaring to life. The hangar vibrated violently. Outside, the horde was breaking through the weakened hangar doors. Zombies poured into the cavernous space, their decaying hands reaching for the helicopter. Hawks now! Bakugo yelled over the deafening roar of the engines. With a surge of power, the Chinook lifted off the ground, swaying precariously. The team held their breath as the helicopter ascended, narrowly avoiding the grasping hands of the zombies flooding the hangar. As they gained altitude, they looked down at the military base now swarming with the undead. They had made it out, but the escape had been a near thing. Suddenly, a screech pierced through the roar of the engines. Several Sky Reapers, drawn by the noise and the activity, were rapidly approaching. Damn it! Those things are faster than I thought. Hawks yelled, struggling to maintain control of the unwieldy aircraft. The Sky Reapers, despite the Chinook's size, seemed emboldened by their numbers. They swooped in, their sharp talons aimed at the helicopter's rotors and windows. They're attacking, a third-year student screamed. Izuku, remembering his earlier encounter, knew they couldn't underestimate these creatures. He and Shoto positioned themselves near the open cargo doors, their weapons ready. As the Sky Reapers dove in, Izuku and Shoto opened fire. Izuku's controlled bursts and Shoto's precise ice shards struck the agile creatures. One Sky Reaper's wing was clipped, sending it spiraling downwards. Another was impaled by a shard of ice. Hawks, despite the chaos, expertly maneuvered the helicopter, making it a difficult target. The Chinook's sheer size, while initially a concern regarding the Sky Reaper's aggression, now worked to their advantage. The creatures seemed hesitant to fully commit to an attack against something so much larger than themselves, their usual predatory confidence wavering. After a tense few minutes, the remaining Sky Reapers, realizing the futility of their assault against the heavily armed and rapidly ascending aircraft, screeched in frustration and peeled away. A collective sigh of relief swept through the helicopter. They had escaped the horde and the Sky Reapers. They were airborne. Looking out at the ravaged landscape below, the journey back to UA seemed daunting. Hawks was still learning to control the helicopter, the supplies they had managed to load were significant but finite, and the world below remained a dangerous and unpredictable place. But for the first time in a long time, they had a real advantage, the ability to traverse the ravaged land from the skies. The long road to the Chinook had been fraught with peril, but it had opened a new chapter in their fight for survival. The flickering hope within UA had just been given wings. Part 11. Wings in the sky and a beast in the courtyard. The roar of the Chinook's engines announced their return long before it came into view above the reinforced walls of UA. A wave of anxious anticipation washed over the gathered students and staff in the courtyard. They had received fragmented radio updates, but the journey had been fraught with peril, and the sight of the lumbering helicopter descending towards them was met with a mixture of relief and awe. As the Chinook landed in the center of the training grounds, a gust of wind and dust swirled around the onlookers. The cargo doors creaked open, and the weary scavenging team emerged, followed by the unexpected sight of Claw. A stunned silence fell over the courtyard. The mutated creature, its reptilian features and sharp claws clearly visible, was unlike anything they had seen within the relative safety of UA. Gasps of fear and surprise rippled through the crowd. Eri and Kota, who had been waiting anxiously with Mandalay, instinctively hid behind her legs, their eyes wide with apprehension. "What in the—" Present Mike exclaimed, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Is that one of those mutated animals?" Ida asked, his posture rigid with alarm. Bakugo, ever the pragmatist, simply grunted. "Brought a diamond pet home, Deku." Izuku stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Claw's head. The creature, sensing the tension, remained close to his side, its yellow eyes warily observing the crowd. "Everyone, this is Claw," Izuku explained, his voice calm but firm. "He saved our lives out there. He's not aggressive towards us." Skepticism and fear remained palpable. Many students instinctively backed away from the creature. Saved you. Kirishima echoed, his hardened form still slightly tense. That thing looks like it could tear us all apart. He did, Shoto confirmed, his gaze steady. He fought off a massive horde to protect us. Slowly, cautiously, some of the braver students and pro-heroes began to approach, their curiosity overcoming their initial fear. He's surprisingly calm, Nijire observed, tilting her head inquisitively as Claw nudged Izuku's hand. Look at his eyes, Ryukyu said, her dragon-like perception keen. There's intelligence there. And loyalty. Mandalay knelt down, her gentle voice addressing Claw. You protected our Izuku, didn't you? Thank you. Claw seemed to understand her tone, its head tilting slightly in response. Eri and Koda, peeking out from behind Mandalay, slowly began to approach, their initial fear giving way to curiosity. He's kind of cool, Koda whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and nervousness. Eri, emboldened by Koda's reaction, took a tentative step forward. He looks a little bit like a big doggy, she said softly. Claw turned its yellow eyes towards her, its gaze surprisingly gentle. The arrival of the Chinook and its unexpected passenger sparked a flurry of discussions throughout UA. The sheer volume of supplies they had managed to bring back was a significant boost to their long-term sustainability plans. Crates of military rations, medical equipment, tools, and even some communication devices were unloaded and catalogued. Principal Nizu, ever the strategic thinker, was already formulating plans for future supply runs using the helicopter, with Hawks slowly but surely regaining his strength and practicing piloting in the relative safety of UA's airspace. The presence of Claw, however, remained a point of debate. Some residents were wary, advocating for the creature to be kept isolated or even expelled. But Izuku, with the support of Shoto, Kirishima, and the wild pussycats, who were surprisingly taken by the creature's unusual loyalty, argued for its integration into the community. He's proven his loyalty, Izuku insisted during a community meeting. He's protected us. He could be a valuable asset. A valuable asset that could rip your throat out if it sneezes the wrong way. Bakugo retorted, though even his tone held a hint less hostility than before. We need to observe him, learn his behavior, Aizawa-sensei said, his voice pragmatic. Midoriya and those who trust him will be responsible for his care and control. As life within UA settled into a new rhythm, with the promise of aerial travel and the unusual presence of a mutated protector, the individual roles and contributions of Class 1A became more defined. Ida, with his inherent sense of order and responsibility, took on a leading role in organizing the distribution of the newly acquired supplies and maintaining internal order alongside the pro-heroes and the security detail. Achiko, still struggling with her failed business ventures and mounting debt at the Candle Bank, a small, community-run ledger system, took on various odd jobs, her initial greed slowly giving way to a desperate need to earn enough candles to survive. Mina, with her infectious energy, helped to organize recreational activities and maintain morale, often collaborating with the radio show team. Kaminari, surprisingly adept at tinkering with salvaged electronics, became a valuable asset in maintaining and expanding their power grid. Jiro continued to contribute to the radio show, her musical talents providing much-needed entertainment. Tokoyami, with Dark Shadow, often assisted with nighttime security patrols within UA's walls. Shoji's enhanced senses proved invaluable in scavenging missions within UA, locating hidden resources and identifying potential structural weaknesses. Ojiro's martial arts skills were utilized in self-defense training for the general student population. Sato's strength was a great asset in construction and heavy lifting. Koda's ability to communicate with animals, while initially limited by the mutated nature of most creatures, occasionally proved useful in understanding the behavior of non-infected wildlife. Toru Hagakure, despite her invisibility, became surprisingly adept at reconnaissance within UA, often providing valuable information about resource distribution and potential social issues. Ciro's tape quirk was utilized in various construction and repair tasks. Over at the Café Hope, a small establishment run by a resourceful third-year student, a group was gathered one afternoon, the aroma of weak but appreciated coffee filling the air. Achiko sat hunched over a meager cup, looking distressed. That loan shark at the Candle Bank is breathing down my neck, she complained to Mina and Jiro, her voice laced with self-pity. I don't know how I'm going to pay it back. My DLVRY service flopped, my luxury, salvaged goods store went bust, everything I try fails. Maybe you should try something you're actually good at, Uraraka, Jiro said bluntly, taking a sip of her coffee. Instead of trying to get rich quick. Yeah, Uraraka, Mina chimed in, though her tone was gentler. Maybe focus on helping out where you can. People appreciate honest work. Achiko scoffed. Honest work doesn't pay enough candles. I need a big score. Her gaze drifted towards Izuku, who was sitting at another table with Eri and Koda, Claw lying protectively at his feet. A calculating look flickered in her eyes. He's doing pretty well with his scavenging, she muttered under her breath. The wild pussycats had fully integrated into UA life. Mandalay and Ragdoll often helped with childcare and recreational activities, their boundless energy a welcome distraction for the younger students. Pixie Bob used her earth flow quirk to assist with the expansion of the farming areas. Tiger, with his immense strength and combat experience, became a valuable instructor in advanced combat training. They had all taken a liking to Claw, often seen petting him and marveling at his unusual bond with Izuku. All Might, though his physical form was still limited, offered guidance and encouragement to the students, his presence a symbol of hope amidst the despair. He often spoke with Izuku, praising his resourcefulness and courage, but also cautioning him about the potential darkness that could accompany survival in such a brutal world. The helicopter remained a symbol of their ambition, a potential lifeline to the outside world. Hawks continued his rigorous practice, the roar of the engines becoming a familiar sound within UA's walls. The journey to the military base had been perilous, but it had yielded not only valuable supplies but also an unlikely ally in the form of a mutated creature and the crucial key to unlocking the skies. The future remained uncertain, but for now the flickering lights of UA shone a little brighter against the encroaching darkness. Part 12. Blossoming affections and future plans. The relative stability within UA, bolstered by the influx of supplies and the newfound aerial capability, allowed for a semblance of social interaction beyond the immediate concerns of survival. For Izuku, this meant an increasing amount of attention from several of the adult women within their sanctuary. Mirko, often finding excuses to spar with him in the training grounds, would offer gruff compliments on his improved combat skills, a rare blush dusting her cheeks as she did so. You're getting faster, Deku, she'd admit, a hint of a smile playing on her lips before she'd abruptly launch another powerful kick. Nijire, her boundless curiosity now focused on Izuku, would pepper him with endless questions about his strategies, his observations of the mutated creatures, and even his thoughts on the philosophical implications of their new reality, her bright eyes sparkling with genuine interest. Midoriya, that analysis you did on the Sky Reaper's attack patterns was fascinating. Do you think their pack mentality is similar to wolves? Oh, and what do you think about the possibility of other intelligent mutated species? Ryukyu, in her more human form, would often seek him out for quiet conversations, appreciating his level-headedness and genuine concern for others. Midoriya, she'd say, her voice warm, you have a remarkable strength not just in your abilities but in your heart. Don't ever lose that. A faint blush would color her cheeks as she offered a gentle smile. Mandalay, with her nurturing nature, often checked in on Izuku, ensuring he wasn't neglecting his own well-being amidst his responsibilities for Eri and Koda. Izuku, you're doing such a wonderful job looking after those two. You're a true father to them. A soft blush would accompany her kind words. Pixie Bob, with her playful energy, would tease him good-naturedly, often with a suggestive wink. My Izuku-kun, you've certainly grown into quite the capable young man. All that responsibility suits you. A mischievous blush would spread across her cheeks. Ragdoll, ever enthusiastic, would often pull him into impromptu training sessions or discussions about potential rescue strategies, her energy infectious. Izuku, you've got to see this new maneuver I came up with. It'll be perfect for taking down those Sky Reapers. You're so smart, maybe you can help me refine it. Her cheeks would flush slightly with excitement. Even Midnight, with her usual sultry demeanor, would offer surprisingly sincere words of encouragement. Midoriya, you possess a rare combination of intellect and courage. Don't underestimate your own worth. A subtle blush would betray a deeper admiration. Izuku, still somewhat oblivious to the romantic undertones, appreciated their support and enjoyed their company, finding in them a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. He was slowly learning to accept their kindness, though the scars of his past still made genuine intimacy a challenge. Meanwhile, the UA staff were also looking towards the future. Aizawa-sensei focused on refining their defense strategies and training the students in advanced combat techniques, his gruff exterior masking a deep concern for their survival. Recovery Girl dedicated herself to expanding their medical supplies and training more students in basic first aid. Present Mike, with the help of Jiro, worked tirelessly on expanding their radio broadcasts, aiming to reach any potential survivors beyond their walls. Cementos was constantly reinforcing and expanding their structures. Snipe focused on marksmanship training, especially against aerial targets. Principal Nizu convened another assembly to discuss their long-term goals. With our aerial capabilities and increased resource security, he announced, his beady eyes gleaming with strategic foresight, we must begin to consider our future beyond these walls. We need to establish contact with other potential survivor groups. We need to explore the possibility of reclaiming territory. And we need to continue to develop sustainable solutions for food, water, and energy. The wild pussycats, in their usual boisterous manner, often teased Kota about his increasingly frequent use of dad when addressing Izuku. Oh, Kota-chan's got a papa now. Pixie Bob would chirp, while Ragdoll would playfully ruffle his hair. Kota would blush furiously and try to deny it, much to their amusement. Eri and Kota's bond with Claw continued to deepen. The mutated creature, despite its fearsome appearance, was remarkably gentle with the children. They would often take turns riding on his broad back during their supervised playtime in the enclosed training grounds, Claw moving with surprising care. They even discovered that Claw, despite his size, was still relatively young, with Nizu estimating he could potentially grow much larger, perhaps even reaching 20 feet in height. This revelation added a new layer of complexity to their integration of the creature into the community. Achiko's situation continued its downward spiral. Her increasingly desperate attempts to get rich quick through poorly conceived schemes, a luxury salvage store that no one could afford, a cooking venture that resulted in inedible meals, only landed her further in debt and alienated her from the community. Her attempts to flirt with and manipulate some of the wealthier residents for candles were met with increasing disdain. Her reputation as a greedy and unreliable individual preceded her. She was now essentially homeless within the walls of UA, often sleeping in abandoned classrooms and relying on the charity of others for meager sustenance. Her bitterness and resentment grew with each failed attempt to improve her situation. One afternoon, a heated argument erupted between Achiko and a student who ran a successful tool repair shop. Achiko had tried to borrow a valuable piece of equipment without any intention of returning it, and her deception was quickly discovered. The incident further solidified her negative reputation within the community. Nizu, during one of his strategic meetings with the staff, addressed the growing issue of external threats. Hawk's reports and our own limited reconnaissance flights indicate that raider activity is increasing. They are becoming more organized and more desperate, likely due to dwindling resources outside. We need to bolster our defenses and consider proactive measures to secure essential medical supplies, which are becoming critically low. The future of UA remained uncertain, a delicate balance between hope and the ever-present threat of the ravaged world outside. But within their walls, bonds were strengthening, plans were being made, and even the most unexpected of allies had found a place. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but the flickering light of their community, fueled by resilience and the burgeoning affections in unexpected places, continued to burn. Part 13. Shattered walls and desperate measures. The fragile peace within UA was shattered without warning. A deafening crash echoed through the grounds, followed by screams of terror. A section of the reinforced outer wall, painstakingly built and maintained, had buckled inwards, splintering under the force of an unseen assailant. Chaos erupted. Students and staff scrambled, their initial sense of security ripped away. Through the gaping hole in the wall lumbered a creature unlike anything they had encountered before. It was massive, easily twice the height of a fully grown man, with thick, armored hide the color of granite. Its limbs were powerful, ending in crushing claws, and its gaping maw was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Glowing orange eyes scanned the panicked crowd, radiating primal hunger. It resembled a monstrous cave dweller from a forgotten nightmare. 2 students, caught too close to the breach, were instantly cut down by its massive claws. 3 others lay injured amidst the debris, their screams adding to the cacophony of fear. Before anyone could react, Claw, with a guttural roar that shook the very ground, launched itself at the creature. Its smaller size belied its incredible speed and ferocity. It darted around the behemoth's legs, its sharp claws tearing at its armored hide, drawing thick black BLD. Izuku, his face grim, raised his rifle and fired a volley of armor-piercing rounds at the creature's glowing eyes. The shot struck home, eliciting a furious roar of pain. The monster thrashed wildly, its massive limbs smashing against the ground, sending tremors through the courtyard. The combined assault of Claw's agility and Izuku's focused fire proved effective. Claw managed to leap onto the creature's back, its claws digging deep into its flesh. With a final desperate roar, the monster collapsed, its massive form crashing to the ground with earth-shattering force. Silence descended, heavy and thick with the stench fear. The injured were quickly attended to by Recovery Girl and her team. The fallen students were mourned in stunned disbelief. Their sanctuary had been breached. Nizu, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a grim determination, addressed the shaken community. This changes everything. Our walls are no longer impenetrable. We faced threats we could not have imagined. Aizawa-sensei, his capture weapon still taut in his hands, surveyed the damage. We need to reinforce the breach immediately. And we need to understand what that creature was and how it managed to break through. A tense meeting was convened in the auditorium. The air was thick with anxiety and the chilling realization of their vulnerability. We need more information, Nizu stated, his voice low and serious. Midoriya, your observations of the infected have been invaluable. Did you notice anything unusual about the creatures outside? Izuku recounted the various types of zombies they had encountered, the increasing mutations, but nothing that resembled the monstrous cave dweller. It was different. Stronger, more armored, and those eyes they seemed to glow with an unnatural energy. Hawks, his wings still healing but his aerial perspective crucial, added, during my flights I've seen larger creatures roaming the outskirts, but nothing that size has come this close to UA before. It's like something is drawing them here. Mirko slammed her fist into the armrest of her chair. Whatever it is, we need to be ready for more. Our walls need to be stronger and we need to be proactive. Agreed, Nizu said. While a dedicated team works on repairing and reinforcing the breached wall, and others focus on tending to the injured and mourning our losses, we must also take steps to secure vital resources. He turned his gaze towards the scavenger leaders. Our medical supplies are critically low. A dedicated scavenging team will depart for the nearby Mizutafu General Hospital. It is a high-risk mission, but the potential rewards are essential for our survival. You will prioritize securing all usable medical supplies, including pharmaceuticals, surgical equipment, and any medical texts or recipes for creating our own remedies. Izuku, Bakugo, Shoto, and a few other experienced scavengers volunteered immediately. While they are gone, Nizu continued, addressing the rest of the community, our focus will be on fortifying our defenses. Teachers and students with relevant quirks will work together to reinforce the outer walls, making them taller and stronger. We will also begin implementing defensive traps and mines around the perimeter to deter and neutralize potential threats, both zombie and mutated. The atmosphere within UA shifted from cautious optimism to grim determination. The breach in the wall had served as a brutal wake-up call. Their sanctuary was not guaranteed, and they needed to adapt and evolve to survive the escalating threats. The following morning, under a heavy sky, the medical supply scavenging team departed. Their faces were etched with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. They knew the risks were immense, venturing into a likely overrun hospital, but the potential to replenish their dwindling medical stores was a necessity. Meanwhile, the rest of UA mobilized. Cementos and other Earth manipulation quirk users began working tirelessly to repair and reinforce the damaged wall, adding layers of concrete and steel. Mei Hatsum, ever the inventor, eagerly began designing and deploying rudimentary traps and mines around the perimeter, utilizing scavenged materials and her explosive creations. The engineering students assisted her, their ingenuity proving surprisingly useful in this desperate situation. The teachers, even those whose quirks were not directly suited for construction or defense, took on organizational roles, overseeing the efforts and ensuring resources were allocated efficiently. All Might, despite his limitations, offered moral support and strategic advice. The loss of their classmates weighed heavily on everyone. A somber mood permeated the usually bustling academy. The reality of their precarious situation had sunk in deeper than ever before. They were not just heroes in training anymore, they were survivors in a world determined to consume them. As the medical scavenging team ventured into the ruins of Mizutafu, the weight of their responsibility pressed down on them. They knew that the future of their community, the lives of their friends and family, might very well depend on the success of their perilous mission. The shattered wall served as a stark reminder of the dangers they faced, but it also ignited a fierce determination to adapt, to become stronger, and to protect the fragile sanctuary they had built. The fight for survival had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. Part 14. The hospital heist and a risky escape. The roar of the Chinook echoed through the deserted cityscape as Hawks expertly navigated the ruined skyline. Below, the skeletal remains of Mizudafu General Hospital stood like a silent monument to a world lost. They landed on the hospital's rooftop helipad, the wind from the rotors whipping up dust and debris. "All right team, stay sharp," Izuku said, his voice firm. "This place is likely crawling with infected, and after what happened at UA we can't rule out more mutated threats. Our priority is medical supplies and any information on creating our own." They moved cautiously through the deserted hospital corridors, the silence broken only by their footsteps and the occasional groan of a distant zombie. The air was thick with the sterile smell of antiseptic, now overlaid with the musty odor of decay. Overturned gurneys, scattered files, and abandoned equipment littered the hallways, a snapshot of the chaos that had likely unfolded. They systematically searched the various wards and operating theaters, gathering boxes of bandages, antiseptic wipes, surgical tools, and any remaining pharmaceuticals they could find. Shoto's ice proved useful for securing doors and creating temporary barriers, while Bakugo's explosions were a last resort for clearing blocked pathways. "Keep an eye out for any kind of research labs or pharmacies," Izuku reminded them. "That's where we're most likely to find recipes or formulas." As they moved deeper into the hospital, they began to hear hushed voices. Peeking around a corner, they saw a large group of heavily armed raiders holed up in the main lobby. They were scavenging through medical cabinets and arguing amongst themselves, seemingly unaware of the scavengers' presence. "The minute they beat us here," one of the raiders growled. "There ain't much left." "Quiet, you idiot," another hissed. "Someone might hear you." Izuku exchanged a look with his team. A direct confrontation would be risky. They needed to avoid them if possible. "The basement," Izuku whispered. "Hospitals often have storage and research labs in the basement. We might find more down there." They moved stealthily, using the shadows and overturned furniture for cover, carefully making their way towards the stairwell leading down. The raiders remained engrossed in their looting, their loud voices masking the scavengers' movements. The basement was dimly lit and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. Rows of shelves lined the walls, some still stocked with medical supplies. They began to gather what they could find, working quickly and quietly. In a small, cluttered laboratory, amidst broken beakers and scattered notes, Izuku's eyes landed on a handwritten formula. It was labeled Stimpack Prototype. The ingredients listed were a combination of chemicals and organic compounds, some of which they might be able to synthesize with their limited resources. Beside the formula lay 3 crude syringes filled with a glowing orange liquid. They looked exactly like the Stimpaks from the old video games he used to play. "Guys, look at this," Izuku exclaimed, carefully picking up the formula and the prototypes. "This could be huge." They gathered as many medical texts and chemical reagents as they could find in the basement, their bags now heavy with precious cargo. The sounds of the raiders upstairs seemed to be growing louder and more agitated. It was time to leave. Their return journey was even more tense. They had to sneak past the raiders again, their movements slow and deliberate. Just as the last of their team reached the stairwell leading back up, Izuku had an idea. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a fragmentation grenade they had salvaged from the military base. "What are you doing, Deku?" Bakugo hissed. "Creating a diversion," Izuku replied, a grim determination in his eyes. He carefully armed the grenade, waited a few crucial seconds, and then hurled it down the hallway towards the main lobby where the raiders were gathered. The grenade landed squarely in the middle of the raider group. Before they could react, it detonated with a deafening blast. Instead of shrapnel, however, a thick yellowish-green gas filled the air. "Let's go. Now," Izuku yelled, leading the charge back up the stairs. As they reached the ground floor, the raiders were coughing and sputtering, clutching their throats. The gas seemed to be non-lethal but highly irritant. More importantly, it carried a strong, pungent odor, the unmistakable scent of decaying flesh. "What the hell was in that thing?" one of the raiders choked out. "Something that's going to bring a lot of unwanted attention," Izuku shouted, pointing towards the hospital's main entrance. A chorus of MMMs and the sound of shattering glass echoed from outside. The gas, carried by the ventilation system and the open doors, was clearly attracting the nearby infected. The groaning was growing louder, closer. "They're breaking in," another raider screamed. Without hesitation, Izuku and his team sprinted towards the rooftop access. The sounds of chaos erupted behind them. The panicked shouts of the raiders, the relentless MMMs of the approaching zombies, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the floor. They burst onto the helipad, the roar of the approaching horde now clearly audible from below. Hawks was already in the pilot's seat, the Chinook's engines whirring to life. "Get in. Get in," he yelled, his face strained with urgency. They scrambled aboard, their hearts pounding in their chests. Just as the first few zombies clawed their way onto the rooftop, Hawks lifted the helicopter into the air. Looking down, they saw the hospital swarming with the undead, drawn by the gas grenade. The raiders, caught between the scavenger's trap and the relentless horde, were likely facing a gruesome end. As the Chinook ascended, carrying its precious cargo of medical supplies and the potential for a new form of medicine, Izuku couldn't shake the grim satisfaction of their escape. They had secured what they needed, but the cost, even if indirectly, was the lives of other survivors. The lines between survival and ruthlessness continued to blur in this broken world. Their journey back to UA was silent, the weight of their actions heavy in the air, punctuated only by the steady thrum of the helicopter's rotors carrying them back towards their fragile sanctuary.